Welcome into another edition of Collegiate Sports Connect. I'm Brian Fisher with D1 Ticker. Happy to be joined now by one of the best in the business, Pat Crakes of Crakes Media Consulting. And Pat, the numbers are out in terms of the college football regular season, and a big winner from the entire season was Fox's Big Noon Saturday. They won really pretty much any demo that you can look at. They also had 5.76 million viewers on linear TV. How big of a win was this for Fox and their new strategy building around that Big Noon window?
I think it was a big win for them. Fox and ESPN effectively have a duopoly in college football distribution, and it'll be more than effective here in a couple of years when ESPN has the SEC number one pick and has that window. It has all the SEC content to themselves. For Fox, they have high quality inventory. They have a reasonable amount of it. They don't have as much as ESPN, and of course CBS still has their own window with the number one SEC pick. So once the Big Ten was finally acquired, trying to figure out the right place and how to program all of that while meeting the promises they made to distributors for FS1 and on retransmission for the broadcast network became a bit of a kind of a work in progress. They quickly got their arms around it. Obviously, I know everybody there really well. I'm not shocked at all that they came together with a cogent programming strategy that basically said, look, ESPN has superior inventory to us and they optimize primetime. That's their business model. CBS has their middle window, late afternoon strategy. They're going to put the best SEC game there. So what's the opportunity? And the opportunity was at noon. Having the Big Ten and a bunch of schools in a conference that after the month of November doesn't like to play later in the day actually made that decision even easier. And then, of course, you throw in the fact that they're trying to build a pregame show, right? And with the pregame show, obviously Fox has an enormously high pedigree in pregame shows from its NFL content, but having a lead out of your best game every week, right? You're basically saying, look, here's our inventory pool of games. We're going to take our best game. We're going to place it in there at noon. That's going to be our window. That's where we're going to put our flag. And then we're going to put our pregame show next to it. And now our investment in our pregame show dovetails off our best inventory. Instead of our best inventory being later in the day, it's right now. And it's right next to this investment in a pregame show that they control completely. They control the amount of units in it. They control the content. They control the flow and the pacing. And using Nielsen program creation rules, they can actually even include programming minutes past noon into the show, which help its rating, and advertisers buy in are perfectly fine with. So the synergy between putting your best inventory as the lead out of a trying to build a flagship college pregame show, it's a home run for them as far as it concerns. I think overall, it shows the strength of the college football marketplace, really second only to the NFL. I mean, I think that's pretty obvious. ESPN had a great year. The programming minutes consumed were off the hook for all the networks for college football. ESPN has a flagship pregame show that lasts 3 hours over on pay TV. Fox has a flagship pregame show that runs from noon to 1 across the entire day. The three primary partners that currently exist, Fox, CBS, and ESPN, are programming highly competitive marquee matchups. And it goes even into the evening with the Pac-12 and Mountain West games. So I think overall it says a lot about Fox's programming strategy. They went where they could optimize the best. They avoided the huge guns that ESPN brings out in primetime. And then they basically optimized their strategy. But it's good for college football overall. It just shows the power and strength of it that all three windows can be so strong.
And you mentioned the three windows. I mean, it averaged over 100,000 more viewers throughout the entirety of the year than the SEC, game of the week on CBS. And I mean, that's obviously a big win for Fox. But how much of that was down to maybe the best games that they had, obviously Ohio State, Michigan being one of them, versus just the strategy, like you're saying, of building this up consistently over time to where it is a destination for viewers? How much of it was the games versus the strategy?
Look, I think that viewers had gotten accustomed, for good reason, to think that the big games would be in primetime or later in the day. That's where advertisers are giving you quality CPMs. The TV usage levels are higher. I mean, that's you kind of think that way when you start. But the truth of the matter is, Fox has known for years that Sunday daytime for NFL was where most viewers watched the most NFL. Primetime enormous, right? NBC, Sunday Night Football, number one primetime show. But the number one show for almost a decade, I believe, has been the Fox late Sunday 4:25 p.m. window. So it wasn't much of a reach to think that that same kind of strategy could be taken advantage of earlier in the day. And then, of course, as with anything, your inventory quality matters. By taking your best games and consistently programming there, you give yourself an opportunity when you get an important matchup, or you get a great game, or you get something that has absolutely complete college football playoff implications in Ohio State, Michigan. You give yourself the opportunity to have a fabulous, flagship year. And that's what happened for them this year. So the strategy is great. It's wonderful. It's going to compete and be at the highest level for years. In some years, when they catch the right kind of matchups, and the Big Ten has the right kind of mix in the top 10, they're gonna produce a powerful number in that window, and it's great for them. And it's great for college football. It's great for all the college football partners. It's an exciting ecosystem. I mean, the NFL ecosystem on Sundays is pretty exciting, but think about the diversity of the college football ecosystem on Saturday. They're the same, yet they're very, very different. And that's the interesting part about it, right? I think it was it's going to have to be a home run. So from advertising perspective, my guess is by placing their number one game there, they were able to get rates that were comparable to primetime. So they're not worried about that. Remember, your strategic college football advertisers, right, that are primarily, involved in the Power Five conferences, are spending money across your network on a multi-year basis. And getting them to buy into the idea that they would get a high quality game, a high viewing delivery window in 12 p.m. and that was worth high quality CPMs regardless of the time period, probably wasn't complicated for Fox, given the relationships their sales force has with the advertising community, which is one of the best in the business, quite frankly. So I think financially on the advertising sales side, we're going to find that they did pretty well. I mean, those Ohio State, Michigan units that they held probably back and scattered, the couple, were sold pretty well, I think, at the end of the day. And again, think about the creation of the pregame show, right? The pregame show now is doing 1 million viewers. That's all inventory they control, and there's sponsorship attached to that, presenting sponsors, title sponsors. That's all created economics off of their investment in the games, where the units and things like that are controlled by the conference. They're basically set by the conference in the negotiation. But the truth of the matter is that don't forget that raising the value of the pregame show is all money Fox keeps. Not only does it just impact the power of the brand and create personalities and stars for them, they keep all those economics themselves. And that's strategically vital. And finally, don't forget that the real way college football gets monetized is through distributor fees, both broadcast retransmission, which is key with Big Noon, and also pay TV. So that's 80% of the long-term economics. They're multi-year, contractual. Ad sales are cyclical on a year-to-year basis. So strategically, building that window up is an absolute financial strategic home run for Fox.
And it's not like Fox has necessarily, vacated prime time. They obviously had the Fall Classic and World Series in the fall as well. That does conflict a bit. They have college football games in prime time. What kind of uplift have they seen maybe in the other windows beyond Big Noon? And how is this maybe a holistic strategy to create an additional uplift on the brand?
Well, I do think it is a holistic strategy. I think it uplifts the brand. You mentioned some of the other properties, but the truth of the matter is Fox, after the post-Disney sale, the strategy has been to optimize live events, primarily sports, on broadcast television and on the pay TV networks. And that requires programming multiple day parts. For college football, they have a high quality inventory, but they don't have as much as ESPN. So they can't fight in every window, and they can't always fight necessarily in prime time. So they have to fight where they have an advantage. ESPN's business strategy is different. They're not trying to win each window. The objective is to make the most money. We get wrapped around a little bit sometimes around the number one thing, which goes back to primetime races. And it is important from a positioning perspective. But the truth of the matter is your economics you drive, and the efficiency behind that is why you're in business. So both ESPN and Fox are thriving. Fox's overall strategy remains they remain having strong programming in prime. Like you said, they have multiple primetime events throughout the year. And as we move forward, I would think that they're always looking to add those because, as I've said, the strategy at Fox has increasingly become about live sports and news attached to distribution through established pay TV bundles and established distribution formats. So far, that's been enormously successful because they haven't had to allocate much capital out to experimental streaming platforms that are very unprofitable yet. So they've been able to do that. And as far as primetime goes, they program a significant amount of sports and programming. I mean, Friday nights are completely turned over to the WWE. So I think their primetime strategy is absolutely fine. And as I said before, the primary windows or an equal window would be a way of saying it. Saturday and Sunday daytime for football is equal to primetime when it comes to collecting viewing and quality of viewing.
Now, Fox obviously has Big 12 rights. They put games like Oklahoma and Texas in this window and have a lot of success. But this has mainly been a Big Ten-centric window. Basically, from time zones, you can kind of understand that strategy. But if you're the Big Ten, who is going to the marketplace and right around the corner now, this is going to be a huge win for that conference, being able to show not only that you have the most watched game in college football in Ohio State, Michigan, but really the success over the course of this season with games like Michigan, Michigan State, Penn State. That's got to be a big storyline for not just Fox, but for the Big Ten as they go to market as well, right?
Yeah, I mean, the Big Ten's never been more valuable. I mean, the Big Ten has always really been the most valuable conference. The SEC's competitive dominance over the past 10 years and its popularity is enormously strong. But from a kind of television perspective, the Big Ten has some advantages. It has the largest number of living alumni, if you count the graduate students, pretty much of the Power Five conferences, and they are geographically dispersed across the United States. The number 2 market in the United States for Big Ten alumni past number 1 Chicago is Los Angeles. The expansion of Maryland and Rutgers enabled the penetration of pay TV basic tiers in the New York and Washington Eastern Seaboard DMAs, and the economic value of the Big Ten has never been higher. You see it on display from the distribution of the Big Ten network and the rates it gets, but you also see it when the conference is competitive in the top 10 and part of the college football playoff picture. You see it in the viewing. It shows up at noon or at 7 p.m. And that drives the value of the Big Ten. Their value's never been higher, but in truth, they've always been the most valuable conference, and they remain the most valuable conference because of the unique structure of their alumni and their geographic dispersion. There's just a ton of Big Ten graduates, both undergraduates and graduate folks spread out throughout the country, and that builds a lot of value when it comes to collecting viewer and negotiating with pay TV distributors, which is how we pay all the bills in sports. Streaming aside, all the bills in sports are still paid by established distribution. Streaming is entering the picture, but there are no positive economics from that yet. All the economics remain on the established side. You have to maintain them. And in that environment, I expect the Big Ten negotiations next year to be quite profitable for the conference.
Now, we both know a lot of TV executives. As much as they might want to put on a positive face, they are very competitive as well. What kind of pressures are the folks at CBS and ESPN and NBC kind of feeling from seeing Fox being out there as number 1, and they're rightfully trumpeting that fact?
Well, I think if you're ESPN, this is about the 12 p.m. window. So I always used to say this at Fox. I think it's very true, and I think both Fox and ESPN are behaving exactly the way they should. If you think about Coke and Pepsi, all Pepsi ever does is talk about Coke, and Coke never talks about Pepsi. ESPN is not really talking about Fox, despite Fox's successes, because ESPN is enormously successful. And Fox is talking a lot about its successes, as it should, and that's a good strategy and positioning strategy for the two of them. I think when you look at ESPN, they are fine with their strategy. Would they like to perhaps reclaim the 12 p.m. window or be able to say something about the 12 p.m. window? That could happen organically in just a bad matchup year, bad viewing year for Fox. I don't know that you really want to optimize your strategy based upon PR, though it's certainly a factor. And I don't think in this case, given ESPN's massive investment in college football, they are the dominant player in college sports in the United States by far. They are number 1. Fox is number 2, but there is a gap between them. And that gap is going to get wider when the SEC number 1 pick arrives in a couple of years. over to ESPN. They will then be programming that 4:30 p.m. window themselves, and they will have more options, right? But Fox will still be the strong number two, and it will be a true effective duopoly. Into that, you mentioned CBS, and I would also throw NBC in their Notre Dame contract. What exactly are they to do? CBS will be technically out of the college football business, I guess, when they lose their SEC window in a couple years. That doesn't mean that they won't go and make a investment somewhere else in that. They're clearly the leader in college basketball, and they actually have a sub-license of Big Ten games from, I believe it is Fox, or no, via BTN, but they have a sub-license of Big Ten basketball games, and what kind of play they could make in the space is very interesting, because BTN, the Big Ten, it's going to be hard to get the Big Ten away from Fox and ESPN, given the nature of the way the contracts are structured, right? Both Fox and ESPN have exclusive negotiating windows. They probably have strong back-end rights, including rights to match. You just can't make, in many cases, these kind of huge strategic billion-dollar outlays without some protections as a network. And it's reasonable for typically for a property that is getting what they want to grant some of that, right? And so it's going to be hard to get things like the Big Ten away from Fox and ESPN, in particular, given Fox is the majority owner of BTN. I'm sorry, I keep saying BTN, the Big Ten Conference, but Fox is the majority owner of BTN, the channel, and it just, that marriage seems to be set, right? ESPN obviously also has rights, and will do everything they can to keep them. It makes no sense for them to back away from that investment. So what CBS does next is going to be very interesting. The Big 12 won't be the Big 12 anymore. I mean, I mentioned the SEC window going over to ESPN. So will all those Oklahoma and Texas games. You mentioned the Red River Shootout that was on Fox this year at noon. That will become an ESPN permanent game, right? In just a couple years, Fox will no longer have that game to program at 12 p.m. That game will be on ESPN brands. So how CBS gets back into this game, the Big 12 will look very different. The Pac-12's rights will be there, but we have lots of conversations about the Pac-12 is a super high quality Power 5 conference, the equal of the rest, but the time zones and other things, you have to think about how you schedule it, and what kind of route their new commissioner takes on monetization will be very, very interesting. So I don't know what CBS does. It's going to be very interesting to see how they evolve their strategy. There's several ways they could get back into the game, but they really have to come up with a cogent strategy and be aggressive and get started on it, which I'm sure if they want to be in college football, they already are. A very sharp group over there, of course. NBC and their Notre Dame strategy, they seem thoroughly happy with it. And I wouldn't expect anything to change there. So I don't know that they're necessarily looking to acquire more college football rights. Though if I had to think of the conference that would be the most interesting to me, if I was there, given the investment in Notre Dame football, it would be the Pac-12, because of the two games between USC and Stanford becoming exclusive to NBC. Notre Dame drives value in the marketplace. Advertisers love it. It's a national brand. Getting more guaranteed games under your window by being involved with a conference like the Pac-12 makes some sense. So it's going to be Fox and ESPN's game, with ESPN in the lead position, probably permanently in many ways, until, depending upon whether there's an expansion of the college football playoff and a second partner is perhaps added.
This is obviously a broadcast-centric positive headline for Fox, but their streaming strategy has been, let's just say, incomplete. They obviously have Tubi and have invested some resources in terms of making that much of a thing. What is Fox's ultimate end game in terms of the streaming platform? We understand that ESPN and how they want to move things eventually to ESPN Plus and go more direct to consumer, but what is Fox's strategy, and how can they maybe use the success story out of Big Noon and transition that into kind of the future?
Well, I think it's important to understand that some of the narrative around streaming that exists in the media and on Wall Street is actually not going to work for sports media. The established pay TV bundle is extremely profitable, even though it's in secular decline. And even though it's growing, streaming activity, for the most part, streaming economic activity, business activity, is enormously unprofitable. Peacock, ESPN Plus lose billions. Um, and that makes some sense when you're creating startups, but you cannot sacrifice the established economics. There is no pivot immediately moment to streaming. So in Fox's sense, I think that they are kind of waiting. Right. Remember, they still have all the economics from the Disney sale. They building streaming platforms. We've learned 5 years ago, the narrative was it was nearly impossible for established media to do. Now we've watched established media create leading streaming platforms from a technical and distribution perspective, almost out of thin air. So, creating the platform can happen. What's the strategy behind it? And right now, given the unprofitability, Fox has chosen to let their chips continue to ride on the established bundle while in decline, remaining profitable. That could change at any moment. I'm sure they have thought about this. They have some kind of plan. But right now, we're going to wait a few minutes and we're not going to get into the streaming war. Disney and NBC are a little different because they have big investments not in primetime entertainment programming, which has become a streaming staple, right? So they have to build these platforms. Sports fit into it in an incremental nature. I'm not so sure that ESPN really wants to move everything to ESPN Plus. For sports, streaming appears to be an incremental distribution platform that enables acquisition of content that in the past you may not have been able to do. For example, the smaller college conferences play many of their games on ESPN Plus, but their top games end up on linear brands for reach, right? You need the reach. You need the inventory heft capability. Streaming enables that. There's a subscription model that offers up supportive economics for things like the Bundesliga, which is not heavily viewed in the United States, but is popular with a segment. A segment can choose to buy ESPN Plus to watch that. But you still need a pay TV bundle to get all the sports if you're a sports fan. And that isn't probably going to change anytime soon. So the streaming is incremental, and what you see an ESPN or a NBC or a CBS with Paramount doing is building streaming platforms, acquiring content for all three platforms of what I call the TriCast: broadcast, pay TV, in decline, right? Streaming growing, but one profitable, one not. Acquiring content for all three, and then twisting dials, right? Gaining the right to simulcast on the streaming platform. Gaining the right with the tier one sports to maybe put a couple exclusive games on the streaming platform, as Peacock had with Notre Dame this year. They had one exclusive game over there, right? Folding up NBCSN enabled them to do things like that. That's what we're seeing. We're not seeing rapid pivots to streaming because streaming's utility in sports as a business model hasn't matured enough yet for us to really understand what the long-term economics of that are. And at the same time, you can't walk away from the old declining established bundle that pays all the bills. That's the reality. People don't feel that, I think, largely because of the success of Netflix, which itself, is its own thing, and it's kind of warped marketplace perception. Streaming is necessary. Streaming is probably a large part of the future, but the reach problem, the economics problem mean that you have to stay married to the established bundle. So what I would say is that Fox's strategy would be to execute on something like that at some point when it made sense. They appear to have that clearly figured out. ESPN side, they needed to build the Disney Plus platform. It makes sense for them because they're in the heft business, right? They're producing lots of inventory. They want to own, for example, the college space. So let's roll up all these other smaller conferences, give them distribution on a quality platform, be an ESPN partner, and their best games, which were always on here anyway, remain on linear. That's a business model that works for Disney, right? And then we just grow and move forward over time. But the big thing you will see, I think, in the upcoming deals over the next 4 or 5 years for college conferences will be an acquisition of rights that have flexibility to move to streaming, but are primarily looking to be distributed on established platforms.
That is definitely something to watch, and some great stuff from one of the best in the business, and Pat Crakes. Thanks for joining us.
Thanks a lot, Brian. I really appreciate it, and happy holidays to everyone.